All right. Well, officially good morning or good evening, depending on where you're at and where you're joining us from. Welcome to the QA Touch Virtual Series, the QA Master Class to Master the Art of Testing. DCCAP is hosting this. DCCAP is the parent company of QA Touch, which is one of the products that we offer. We also do a lot in e-commerce around integration and customization and offer a host of other products as well. Today we'll be hearing from Damian Sinodinos, founder and CEO of Ineffable Solutions and president of QA or the Highway. He's going to take us through a discussion in a little bit here. Just going to go through some of the other things that we're going to talk about really quickly. I'm Catherine, the partner manager at DCCAP. We do have a hashtag, which is the QA Master Class, which you can use for social media and engagement in that way. And then this is just a little bit more about the DCCAP products, the digital suite that we offer, Productimize for the product customization, ChlorS for our integration, a product information management tool with FlexiPIM, and then of course QA Touch, which is in regards to the series that we're seeing here. So let me go back to introducing our speaker, who is going to be, again, Damian Sinodinos. Damian is an international speaker and trainer delivering keynotes, sessions, and workshops focused on fundamental topics and people skills based on real-world experience and supplemented with deep research. His diverse experience spans many roles, companies, and industries, including finance, retail, insurance, education, and realty. And among the many other things, including authoring and illustrating a children's book with extensive background in improv. He helps to organize QA or the Highway, an annual regional testing conference. In his discussion today, he'll be talking about communication between internal teams, problem detection, understanding problems, and investigating concepts that can have a real impact on you, your role, and your responsibilities. So with that, I'll ask Damian to come up and join us here. We will have time for Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to put that in the Q&A tab or in the chat. And then Damian, I'll have you come on board and I'll let my screen go here for you.
All right, thanks so much for the nice introduction, Catherine. I really appreciate it. Let me share my screen here.
Thank you.
Also, thanks to Srija for reaching out to me. Thanks to DCCAP for the opportunity. And thanks to all you folks for spending your morning, afternoon, or evening with me. I really appreciate your time. I'll hope to make it worthwhile. My name's Damian Sinodinos. I don't look like my headshot. I'm much more COVID-y with the hat and the beard here. But I'm going to talk today about WordSmatter, exploring semantics, testers, and problems. I, as a professional public speaker, I much prefer to be physically in front of you, in the same room as you, so I can read body language and read facial expressions and be cold or hot at the same time with you. That's what I really prefer. But in this new strange world, online is what we're at. So unfortunately, there's not going to be a lot of interaction, but I hope to be able to give you something of value today. So I usually start by asking the crowd, what exactly is smatter? The title of this talk is WordSmatter. Anybody know what WordSmatter is? Well, I'll give it up. Smatter is a slight superficial knowledge of a language or a subject. It means a small amount of something, a tiny bit. So that's exactly what today is going to be. It's going to be a smattering of words, a slight superficial, I have slight superficial knowledge of words. I'm going to give you a small amount of words. I'm going to use words to talk about words. This is semantics, all about meaning that holds words and meaning together, the glue that holds those things together. And I'm going to talk about semantics and relate that to testers and problems. So let's get started. As is the fashion, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I won't spend too long, but I think it's important to better know a little bit about somebody so that you can better judge if you should listen to them, and if so, why. So I'm a lot of things, as all of us are. We have a lot of titles and roles and responsibilities. A few that might be interesting to you. I'm a tester. I started testing in 1993 at a company called CompuServe. I joined the QA department, and over the next 25 years, I tested at about 15 different companies around Central Ohio in airline, finance, insurance, retail, education, all sorts of different industries and domains. I filled a lot of different roles and used a lot of different methodologies and tools, but I've been in testing and QA for quite some time, so I have a lot of diverse experience in that area. As Catherine said, I'm the current president of the QAir, the Highway Software Testing Conference held in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I live. I also help and mentor testers around the world and often speak at testing events. Another thing I am is an improviser. I have over 10 years of improv experience. I'm an artist. I've been drawing since I was a child. I drew a lot of illustrations for my family and friends, and I create slide decks. And I combined those and wrote a children's book teaching kids life skills through improv comedy. One thing I didn't mention is I'm an expert on semantics, because I'm not formally trained on this. So why should you listen to me? Because I might still have something of value to say. Why did I get interested in semantics and language and linguistics? It started with an unfortunate event about 15 years ago. I got married. That's not the unfortunate part. The unfortunate part is I got divorced very quickly afterwards. And when I retrospected and looked backwards on what happened, I realized it wasn't about the dirty dishes and the laundry and the small little quarrels we would have. It was more about miscommunication. My ex-wife and I weren't communicating properly. So to avoid future divorce and future pain, I set about becoming a better communicator. I've been studying communication for about 15 years just to help myself become a better person. I've learned a lot, and I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned today with you that have helped me become a more effective, clear, concise communicator. And hopefully, if your context is similar enough to my own, then these might be helpful to you as well. So this is the agenda. Very briefly, purpose and expectation. Start with the why. I really think it's important to understand why you do something to help you understand what to do and how and when to do it. After that, I'm going to start and talk about a smattering of semantics, a little bit of semantics, some things that I have learned that have helped me better understand meaning. And finally, the last half is going to be talking, using semantics to deconstruct a particular phrase that many of us have heard in our careers. And then we're going to analyze that phrase. So let's get started, starting with the purpose and expectations. So what? That's another way to say why. Why are you here? Why am I here? Why are we here today? Not in a philosophical sense, but just today in this masterclass, why are you here? And when I ask the crowd, they have always various different reasons, and there's no wrong reasons, but they're very interesting reasons that people chose this talk at this time. Sometimes people say that they're there because they want to get a primer on semantics. They know a little bit about it, or perhaps they know nothing and they want to learn more about it. Sometimes people are there because they're testers and they're interested in testing and they want to get new or practical insight from me into a tester's role and responsibilities. Now, this talk, the first half of it, the part about semantics, is truly applicable to anybody, anywhere. If you use communication to express your thoughts and share ideas, then semantics is an important topic. So that is everyone that uses words to communicate. And but I'm also going to relate that to testing. I think that a lot of people showing up for a QA Touch Masterclass on testing are going to be related to testing and testers. So I'm going to relate all the semantics ideas to testing. But also, maybe you're here because words matter. They truly matter. Words help us talk pragmatically about our work. They dispel the myths that lead to bad practices. They help us understand what we do as testers better. They help us share practical testing knowledge with each other. Words are incredibly important. They help us share and exchange ideas. Otherwise, the ideas are trapped as bubbles inside of our head. So I think that words matter is an incredibly important concept, and that's one of the main reasons that I created this talk. So it's just semantics. Maybe you've heard this phrase before. Somebody says, you're discussing something, perhaps even debating it, and at some point they say, it's just semantics. So what do they mean by that? What exactly does somebody mean when they say it's just semantics? Well, it could mean many different things. Perhaps when somebody says it's just semantics, they mean it's only a difference of words. You know, we're arguing about something and I'm saying this and they're saying that, and they say, Damien, it's just semantics. We're on the same page. We share the exact same idea. We're just using different words to express it. It's just semantics. Or maybe perhaps they mean it's merely a minor difference. We're very, very close. Our ideas are very similar. They're not the same, but they're very similar. It's just a semantic difference, Damien. Sometimes people might mean when they say it's just semantics, it's a fundamental difference, Damien. And in fact, your idea is so different than mine. It's semantically different. That's maybe what they mean when somebody says it's just semantics. But in my personal experience, when I hear it's just semantics, very often what I think the person is actually saying is, shut up, this conversation is over. That's very often how I feel when somebody says it's just semantics. It feels like it's a bullying tactic, like they're trying to get me to shut down or end the conversation. They don't want to talk about this anymore. Well, that kind of stinks because I think that semantics is very important. Let's dig into it a little further. What exactly is semantics? The word semantics comes from the Greek word semantikos, which actually means significant. And I think that that is significant. Semantics is significant. It actually means one dictionary definition is the meaning of a word, phrase, sentence, or text. And I say one dictionary definition because there's many dictionaries and all of them have different, similar, but different definitions. Definitions are very much about opinion and subjectivity. But one dictionary definition is the meaning of a word, phrase, sentence, or text. Now that seemed interesting to me because as someone that's interested in language and words, I had seen a very similar definition before. And in fact, when I looked it up, I realized that the definition of semantics was very similar to the definition of the word definition. A statement of the exact meaning of a word is almost the same as the meaning of a word, phrase, sentence, or text. So semantics and definition mean almost the same thing. Not only that, the definition of meaning, what is meant by a word, concept, or action, is very similar to the first two. So if somebody says it's just semantics, maybe they mean those first three things. Maybe they're telling you to shut up because the conversation is over. But taken literally, what they're actually saying is it's just definitions. It's just meaning. So if you're discussing and debating something with somebody and they say it's just semantics, taken literally, what they're saying is it's just meaning. I would say, indeed it is. That's significant. That's a very important thing. The meaning of our words matters. Words matter. So semantics is not just something we do as adults. Semantic conversations start as children. I have two children. They're 7 and 9, and they're constantly asking me, Daddy, why? Daddy, what does this mean? Daddy, what does that mean? Daddy, what do you mean? Every time they ask that question, that is a semantic question. And every time I answer them, we're entering into a semantic conversation. They say, Daddy, Daddy, sometimes they ask me questions that I don't even understand. Daddy, when is the banana? And I say, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's a semantic conversation. And it doesn't stop when you're a child. When you grow up, adults constantly have semantic conversations. They're constantly asking, what do you mean? And that's a very important question. If you ignore what someone means and you just assume, you could cause miscommunication. In fact, sometimes if somebody says to me, I hate semantic conversations, Damien, what I'll ask is, well, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, what I mean is, and I've tricked them into having a semantic conversation. Finding out what somebody means or somebody asking you what you mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's nothing to fear. Although sometimes the idea of semantics, the word semantics, sometimes has negative connotations. And I'm trying to dispel that idea today. I think it's a very important concept. So here's some of the things I'm going to talk about with semantics. I'm going to look at a boxes metaphor, something I came across that helped me better understand words and the structure of sentences. I'm going to talk about Humpty Dumpty and see what we can learn about semantics from him. I'll give you some examples of disputed words. I'll talk about same but different. What does that mean? I'll give a quick example of the life of a word. I'll introduce you to a few strange creatures and finally talk about the name is not the thing. These are all ideas that relate to semantics. So first, the boxes metaphor. I came across this in a book called Metaphors We Live By. And to me, oftentimes I visualize ideas to help me better understand them. And this was a visualization that really helped me. If you think of every word as a box, you might think of the contents of that box being the meaning, the definition of the word. So for instance, the word definition, we've already looked at this before. We saw the definition before. So imagine that the word definition is a box. If you open that box, out spills the meaning, out spills the definition. And very roughly, taking out the articles and connecting words, the definition of definition is a statement of the exact meaning of a word. So each of those words itself is a box containing its definition, its meaning. So if you open up one of those, what does the word word mean? Well, the word means a single, distinct, meaningful element of speech. Continue this process. What does meaningful mean anyway? Open up that box. Meaningful means having meaning. And you start to see that there's some recursion going on. The word meaning has already been said before. That's a box that we haven't yet opened yet. So as you can see, every time that you say a simple word like definition or table or cow or regression or system or checking or testing, those words contain meaning, which contain boxes with meaning, which contain boxes with meaning. There is infinite knowledge contained in a single word. And if I assume that the contents of your box are the same as my box, we might be engaging in miscommunication. So it's almost miraculous to me that anyone can communicate with anyone else ever, because there's so many assumptions built into the meaning attached to words, the contents of the boxes that we all have in our head. Anyway, this metaphor really helped me better understand how critical and difficult communication can be. If I think about talking to somebody with all the various boxes that we're passing back and forth, how many am I actually unpacking for them so they truly understand me? How many of their boxes am I asking to be unpacked so that I understand them? Moving on, Humpty Dumpty, a famous character from Alice in Wonderland. And among linguists, there's a very famous passage in the book. I'll read a section of it here. It says, Humpty is talking to Alice, and he says, they're talking about unbirthdays. Unbirthdays, Humpty Dumpty says, there's only one day for birthday presents, you know. There's glory for you. Alice says, I don't know what you mean by glory. And Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. He says, of course you don't, until I tell you. I meant there's a nice knockdown argument for you. Alice said, but glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument. Humpty replied, when I use a word, he said in a scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean. Nothing more, nothing less. So what exactly is happening in this particular scene? What is happening? What happened is Humpty used the word glory in a very unorthodox, uncommon manner. And he used it in a sentence with a meaning that is not very commonly known. It didn't mean something magnificent or something wonderful. He meant it to mean a nice knockdown argument. Well, instead of just letting it pass by, Alice asked a question. She challenged that word. She said, hey, you used a word in a way that it doesn't seem logical or reasonable to me. And she challenged it. Now, if she had not done that, if she had not asked him, what do you mean by glory, then there might have been miscommunication. So anytime you're having a conversation with someone and they have a word that doesn't mean what you think it should mean in that context, ask them. There's nothing wrong with that. And also what this section points out is communicating involves an unspoken, unwritten contract between the players, between the communicators, that the words that they use mean roughly what they're supposed to mean. So think about how far can you stray from the meaning of a very common word before it becomes confusing to someone else. Lewis Carroll also wrote in Symbolic Logic. He's the author of Alice in Wonderland. He said, I maintain that any writer of a book is fully authorized in attaching any meaning they like to any word they intend to use. If I find an author saying at the beginning of the book, let it be understood that by the word white, I shall always mean black, then I, as a reader, must meekly accept his ruling, however injudicious I think it may be. So if you are able to define a word up front and say, every time I say white, it's going to mean black, that person may disagree and say, well, white doesn't mean black, but they will understand you. And that's the important part about communication, understanding, sharing ideas sufficiently, adequately to other people. Now, if you've seen this cartoon before, Randall Munroe, a cartoonist on the internet, writes XKCD. It's a very funny cartoon. This is his take on it. He says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. Alice says, I wonder what all those words you said just meant. Maybe you're telling me I can have all your stuff? Humpty says, wait, no. She says, oh gosh, your car too, thanks. So that's a humorous take on this very old idea. If you use words and try to play the game that I can make them mean whatever I want, then others can do the same thing and perhaps get your car. All right, moving on. Disputed words. Alice disputed the word glory, said, I don't think you're using glory to mean what it's supposed to mean, the common, unspoken, unwritten contract. So what are some other disputed words? Sometimes you're having a talk or a chat or a debate with somebody and they dispute a word. They say, that doesn't mean this, it means that. So for example, fewer or less. Sometimes people say that they're synonyms. They mean the same thing. But a stickler, somebody that's very pedantic, may say, well, there's actually technically a difference. In fact, fewer means things that you can actually count, and less should be used for things that you cannot practically count. For example, fewer people, you can count the number of people, have less patience. You can't really count patience for discussing semantics. So some people may dispute if you say there's 10 items or less at the supermarket. They may say, well, you're supposed to use the word fewer because you can count how many items are in your shopping cart. So that might be an area of dispute. Similarly, expect and anticipate. Some people think that they're synonyms. They mean the same thing, don't they? Well, actually, there's a technical difference. Expect is for anything that you regard as likely to happen, that you think is going to happen. Anticipate is the same thing, except that you also take action. So for example, she anticipated a difficult test, and so she studied hard. In contrast, she expected a high grade. Why? Because she studied hard. So you expect something, but you anticipate something and then act on it. So there is a technical difference and people might dispute that. What about literally, ironically, resources? Some of these can get pretty heated. Literally. I literally laughed my head off. Literally has changed so much that dictionary definitions and the common usage of the word actually mean figuratively. people are using literally to mean figuratively, and it's being accepted that way. Ironically, I think that Alanis Morissette in her song ruined this term. She mentioned a lot of things that aren't really ironic at all per the definition in the dictionary, but she mentioned a lot of things that are unfortunate or perhaps coincidental. Resources, this is a one that I see oftentimes debated in technological and testing circles, that I'm not a resource, I'm a human being, I'm a person. Well, dictionary definitions of resource say that it is something that can be drawn upon in times of need, a source of help, information, or strength. Those are definitions of resource. I like to think that I am a source of information and help and strength, and I can be drawn on when needed. So in that sense, I don't really have a problem being called a resource. But since words don't just have dictionary definitions, they have understood meaning and agreed upon meaning between the players, the communicators. Now, as words evolve, there's a lot of negative connotations. And sometimes, even if resource means a source of strength, it's used in a negative way. And therefore, it can be taken to mean a negative thing. And therefore, I understand why people get upset with the use of resources to mean human beings, because it's used in a condescending manner. So there's a lot of these phrases and words can be very, very debatable, very heated. Done, finished, complete. Perhaps in your place of work, you've come across this debate before. Is this done or is it finished? Is it finished or is it complete? They mean the same things. I've been in certain companies where done, finished, and complete mean very different things, and you have to use them to mean different things. I have a wonderful story where I was at a company and I joined, and as part of the onboarding process, one of the first things they did was give a glossary of terms, contextual industry jargon and internal company phrases and words and acronyms that they used so that I could better communicate with them. And this is a great idea, to give new employees a list of terms that are used inside that context. As I was reading through it, I came across their definition of done. They said, here's the word done, and this is what we mean when we say done at our company. Right after that, they had a word called done, done. It was the word done twice, but it meant something different than the word done right above it. I thought, that's odd. And then below that, they had another word called done, done, done. It was the word done 3 times. And I thought, this is ridiculous. It meant something different than done, done, and meant something different than done. But I thought it was stupid until I thought about it more logically. I looked back and I thought, this is brilliant. They could have called it banana or shoe. They could have used any word, made up a new word. But by creating different words, done, 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 and done, 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 they had created a language, a lingua franca, a common shared language among themselves that they could communicate more effectively, more clearly. Now, somebody outside of the company might hear one of the employees talk about, it's done, done, but not done, 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 and it's foreign to them. It seems ridiculous. But within that company, they were able to clearly communicate, hey, what's the status of this task? They say, well, it's done, but it's not done, done. Oh, I totally understand what you mean. So actually, it was a very brilliant thing to come up with meanings and shared understanding from that glossary. There's another controversial term that's often disputed, is best practice. I often see people discussing this on various social media platforms, and I want to dig into it a little bit. So I'm going to start with a personal story. This is my daughter, Alina. We were out one day at a daddy-daughter day and stopping in and getting coffee and donuts and milkshakes and all kinds of fun stuff. As we're riding in the car, we're talking, and she says, hey, Daddy, Stella is my best friend, and Avery is my best friend. And I thought, well, best means the most. There's only one best, like unique. And I laughed and I said, you're an idiot. No, I didn't say that. What I said was, as someone that's interested in language, I said, well, what do you mean? I entered a semantic conversation. I said, what do you mean by best? When you say Stella is your best friend and Avery is your best friend, what exactly do you mean, sweetheart? And she answered, you know, Daddy, Stella is my really good friend. And Avery is my really good friend. That's what I mean. So by seeking understanding, just like Alice asked Humpty Dumpty, I found out that when she says the word best, what she means is really good. Now, I don't agree with that definition, but I do understand what she means. When she says best, now I understand that she means really good. So we're able to more effectively communicate with each other since there's understanding. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into best. What does best actually mean? One dictionary definition is that which is the most excellent, outstanding, or desirable. Most. There can be only one on a stack of things. There's only one best. What about practice? Practice is the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method. This is a dictionary definition. So if you mash up these two definitions to best practice, you get the most excellent, outstanding, or desirable application or use of an idea, belief, or method. So that's a very logical way to come to a definition of best practice, simply mash up the definitions of best and practice together. But this isn't always the way the definitions come about. Sometimes words together have different meanings than what they do apart. This is where idioms come from. Phrases like it's raining cats and dogs, or I kicked the can. Phrases that I understand the word kick and can, but I would never guess that in a certain culture, kicking the can means to die. So sometimes you put words together and they mean something different. Now, in this case, best practice, a dictionary definition of it, is very similar to the mashup. A best practice in the dictionary is defined as procedure that is accepted or prescribed as being correct or most effective. Okay, so I can see why some people complain about that, because best practice, well, how can you possibly know it's a best practice? Well, let's dig in a little further. Best, I think, can sometimes mean three different things. In one way, somebody can say best, like this is the best soup. You got to go to Joe's Diner because they have the best soup. It's wonderful. Well, what they mean is it's subjective. They're saying best to me. This is the best soup to me. And that's obviously subjective. When they say best, I don't mistakenly think that they've tried every soup in the world at every deli in the world. I understand that they're saying best and meaning it subjectively from their point of view. Sometimes people will use the word best or best practice to mean some very, very literally in some very specific context. Imagine someone that runs a race and they win. They cross the finish line first. You might call them the champion, the winner, perhaps even the best runner. If you called this person the best runner, again, most people would not mistake it to say the best runner in the world ever. No, most people understood that there's an implied context. No, the best runner in this race, in this city, on this day, that's the best runner. So sometimes there's an implied context that is not explicitly spoken or stated. So you might want to dig in and say, when you say best, do you mean in some particular context? And if so, what is that context? That'll help me better understand by what you mean. Best practice, best runner, best soup. Oh, just at Joe's Deli? Understood. There's a third way. Sometimes people use the word best as hyperbole, as a way of exaggerating. This is the world's best boss. Again, I don't think that they've worked for everyone. I think they're using the word best to mean really, really great, just like my daughter used the word best to mean really good. So, while best practice can be a controversial phrase, and I understand the reasons for it, I also like to seek understanding and think about the context. Are they using it subjectively? Are they using it literally with some implied context? Are they using it figuratively or for exaggeration? So what does all this mean? Disputed words. Words evolve, they change. Communication is still possible even if someone disputes a word. And if you say there's 10 items or less, well, I understand that fewer can be counted and less cannot be counted. And what you probably mean is fewer. Did I understand what you're saying? Sure. Will I dispute the word then? I don't think it's necessary. Now, sometimes there's instances where dispute is very necessary. It's very important to understand the meaning of a particular word because there's a high risk with a horrible impact. Then perhaps I might dispute the word and seek understanding. But very oftentimes, if I get what someone's trying to say, 10 items or less, I understand what they're saying. There's no reason to dispute a word. So, same but different. What does this mean? This is another way of saying a distinction without a difference. This is a distinction without a difference is an idea that is an artificially created distinction where no real or meaningful distinction exists. Now, this might be a little bit difficult to understand, so I'll give you an example. And it comes from a 1986 movie, Crocodile Dundee. Now, in this movie, Crocodile Dundee with the hat there, he's walking down the street with a companion. And he comes up and a guy comes up to mug him. And the mugger pulls out a knife and he says, "Hey, Crocodile Dundee," he says, "give me all your money." And Crocodile Dundee kind of laughs and he looks down and he pulls out a much bigger knife. And he says to the mugger, "That's not a knife." And he shows his knife. He says, "That's a knife." Now, what exactly is happening in this scene? It's a brilliant scene. It's a funny scene. The mugger gets scared, runs away, and Crocodile Dundee saves the day. So what happened? Is Crocodile Dundee, was the director and writer of this movie trying to show that our hero, the hero of the movie, is actually a complete moron and cannot recognize knives? And he thought that the mugger was holding a banana? Is that what they were trying to express there? No. What they were trying to express is Crocodile understood that the mugger was actually holding a knife. When he said, "That's not a knife, this is a knife," what he was trying to do is intimidate the mugger. He was trying to scare him, and it was effective. The mugger got scared and ran away. But you can be sure that there's no way that Crocodile Dundee thought that the mugger was not holding a knife. So if there's no real difference, then what is the purpose of the distinction? Oftentimes people will make distinctions when there's no, will call out distinctions when there's no real difference. Think about a cop pulling someone over and they say, "Have you been drinking alcohol, sir?" And they say, "No, no, no, no alcohol, just beer." The cop says, "But please step out of your car, sir." And he says, "This is not a car, this is a Ferrari." The cop says, "Sir, I think you're lying to me." He says, "I'm not lying. These are alternative facts." These are distinctions without a real difference. Perhaps in our context as testers, we've heard it's not a defect, it's a feature. So if someone makes a distinction, but there's no real difference, then why are they calling out this difference, this distinction? Maybe they have an agenda. Maybe they're trying to push their particular point of view or an agenda. Maybe there's a political reason. Maybe they're trying to advance some social or political commentary. There's all sorts of reasons that people will call out a distinction when there's no real difference. Perhaps if somebody says it's not a bug, it's not a defect, it's just a feature, maybe they're trying to avoid work, because if it was a bug, they'd have to go and fix it. So by calling it a feature, they don't have to work. So maybe that's the reason that they're calling something the same even though they're different, or different even though they're the same. Something to keep a watch for. All right, let's talk about the life of a word. Quickly, a neologism, it comes from the Greek words neo, which means new, and logos, which means words. So neologism is a new word. It's one that's entering the common language. It's not widespread yet. It's different than a protologism, which is a brand new word that's just been created. But to give you some examples of what a neologism is for instance, brand new words. I already talked about unbirthdays that came from Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll created that word when he created that book. And it's every day of the year that's not your birthday. Noob, this is a new word, came around in early 2000. And it talks about people that are very new to something, especially on the internet, new to this activity. Truthiness, also in the mid 2000s, a word that means has a truth feel to it, even though if it's not actually factually true. Neuroplasticity, the ability of our minds to change and create new pathways, synaptic connections, has only been around since about 1890. So these are brand new words that did not exist before those dates, but were created and someone attached meaning to them. So words are born all the time. But sometimes existing words are repurposed. Google used to mean the largest possible number. Now it's also a company. It's even a verb. Google this. Spam used to be a type of meat in a can, but it also means now a type of unwanted email or unwanted digital artifact. Cloud, it's not something in the sky anymore. Well, it still is, but it's also somebody else's computer, a computer somewhere. Ask. Of course, you can ask someone something, but it's also become a noun. It's actually not, using ask as a noun is nothing new. Ask has been used as a noun for hundreds of years, but putting a modifier in front of it, like I have a big ask, is something that came around in the 80s. It's a pet peeve of mine. It annoys me. Sometimes words not only change their meaning, they're repurposed, but they mean the opposite of what they used to mean. Bully used to mean someone that's a really good, upstanding person, but now obviously it means someone who intimidates or harms others. Awesome used to mean something that's terrible, or causing terror or dread. Now it means something that's awe-inspiring. Awful used to mean something that's awesome, inspiring awe. But now it means something that's bad or unpleasant. So sometimes words not only change, but they mean the opposite of what they originally did. Sometimes we mash up words. Portmanteau is the French word for it, or the English word that comes from French. Mash up is another word. Brunch, a combination of breakfast and lunch. Spork, a combination of spoon and fork. Dun, 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 I've mentioned that one. Another fun one is turducken, a combination of a turkey and a duck and a chicken all put together. It's a meal. So sometimes you can mash up words, create brand new words, and attach new meaning to them. And sometimes words die or they're retired. Fudgel. Fudgel means pretending to work on something but not really doing anything. I think I see a lot of that in the workspace. Brabble is arguing about nothing. Apricity, I love this word. It's the warmth of sun. That's the warmth of the sunshine in the wintertime. These are words that are gone. They're kind of gone the way of Latin. They're not used anymore, but they're beautiful words. So words are born, they evolve, they change meaning, they're repurposed. Sometimes they mean the opposite of what they once did. Sometimes they die and go away. So I think this is very, very important to remember that when somebody says, that's not what that means, I dispute that. Ask, well, what is the reason for the difference? Ask, is this word evolving? Literally used to mean something that's actually true. Now it means figuratively. So ask, what do they mean? What's the current stage of life of this particular word? Strange creatures. Let me introduce you to two quickly strange creatures. The first is called a tardigrade. It's also called a water bear. Another name for it is the moss piglet. The second creature I'd like to introduce you to It's a species of very large saltwater clam. It's a mollusk. It's native to the west coast of North America. It has shells that range from 15 to 20 centimeters. It's a long neck. I won't read the rest of this. It's bred and eaten. There's a lot of interesting information. There's even a few pictures of it there. So what I would ask you, normally I ask the audience in person, is which creature, I've introduced you to two creatures, which creature do you think you now know more about? And without fail, people would say the second one. And then I seem a little curious because they don't even know the name of the second creature. Now, some may because they've encountered it, but most people have never seen this creature before. It is a very strange creature. I say, well, how could you say that you know more about that creature if you don't even know what it's called? You don't even know the name of it. Well, this idea, this slide comes from Richard Feynman, American physicist. He talks about the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing about something. And this is fascinating to me because very oftentimes I will know a concept, but not know the name of that concept. And someone will say, do you know the so-and-so technique? And I'll say, no, I never heard of it. And they start to explain this technique to me. And as they explain it, I go, oh, yeah, actually, I'm very familiar with it. I use it all the time. I didn't know it was called that. Well, I feel like knowing more about the technique is actually more important than knowing the label, the name that they put upon it. A great personal story from this is I was working in a company as a test lead, and I asked one of the employees, we got a new build, and I said, hey, can you go run the regression test? I need you to go and do the regression testing on this new build. And they said, sure, no problem. And they came back a very short time later and they said, oh, I'm all done. Here's the results, and just a few problems found. I went, wow, that's fast. I don't know how they did the regression testing so quickly. And several days later, we got a new build, and I asked this employee again, go do the regression testing. And once again, they returned very, very fast. And they said, I'm done. And I thought, this is amazing. They're the fastest tester I've ever seen. So when we got the third build a few days later, I was about to ask them to go do the regression testing, but I paused and I said, hey, what does regression testing mean to you? And they said, well, you know how we have all of the thousands and thousands of our tests that we run against a build? I said, sure. They said, well, I pick only a certain few of those that only test the important functionality just to kind of verify that the build is okay. That's regression testing. I went, oh my gosh, what you've just described, I call smoke testing or sometimes sanity testing, taking a selection of tests from the larger set and running those. This is why she was completing the regression testing so quickly, is she was doing what I call sanity or smoke testing. So we had a miscommunication, but we never even realized it. And it wasn't until one of us decided to have a semantic conversation and ask for meaning that we discovered the miscommunication. So let's get back to these two strange creatures. I won't leave you hanging, but sometimes I think understanding the concept, whether we called it regression testing or smoke testing, if I had asked that person, go run all the tests, they'd say, oh, smoke testing? I'd say, well, I don't think that's not what I call it, but I want you to run all the tests, regardless of what you call it. I think sometimes knowing the concept is more important than name. So I won't leave you wanting. I will give you more information about these two strange creatures. The tardigrade is a water-dwelling, 8-legged, segmented micro-animal. I won't read all this, but it is an incredibly fascinating creature. I encourage you to look up tardigrades. They're one of my favorite animals. They're actually visible by the naked eye. They're very small, but they're very robust, interesting creatures. And the second creature, there's the name. I'll leave it up there, give you a moment to read it. I would assume that many of you have read this as geoduck, and you would be incorrect. The way you pronounce that creature's name is geoduck. Geoduck. Now, you might think that's ridiculous, and I agree, it's a little bit silly, but there's a history behind this. This particular creature, the original name for it came from the Lushoshit language of the Nisqually Native American tribe, and the way that they pronounced it was Gwidek, Gwidek. So over time, as words and pronunciation changed, Gwidek became Gwiduck, Geoduck. Now somewhere, the spelling of that changed, but the pronunciation never followed suit. So this is an instance of a word and the spelling not matching up, not making logical sense. However, that's the case. And you think that's weird? What about the word kernel or February or GIF, the acronym, GIF or GIF? I have strong opinions about that because I used to work with this person and they came up with the term, they came up with the name, and therefore I believe that's how it should be pronounced, GIF. So finally, the name is not the thing. Names are important, but they should not be confused with the actual concept or the idea or the thing itself. This is called reification, just a technical term for this. And here's a quote from Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. She's lamenting the fact that she cannot be in love with Romeo just because of his family name. So what about a rose? We call it a rose. Does that affect the actual roseness of the rose? Well, what if we called a rose instead of stink blossom? Would that affect how a rose smells? Well, no, I mean, a rose would still smell just as sweet, even if it was called a stink blossom. Well, okay, well, let's go further. What if it was called a phlegm flower? Phlegm flower, ugh, disgusting. Now, it doesn't change the attributes, the actual physical properties of the rose, but it could change our perception of the rose. Imagine giving your loved one a bouquet of phlegm flowers. I got you these phlegm flowers. I love you so much. Now, our perception, our feelings about something is very much affected by the words that we use. So while the words themselves do not affect the attributes of the thing, they can affect the perception. Other ways of expressing this idea is don't confuse the map with the territory. Don't confuse the menu with the meal. Remember that the model is not the thing that is being modeled. Remember that a test plan or a test strategy is not the plan for testing or the strategy for testing. There's simply a document that describes those things. All right, in summary, we've talked about boxes metaphors that help us visualize words and how they stack. Humpty Dumpty talked about using words in a common way that people understand, and straying too far from that can cause miscommunication. Disputed words. Yes, sometimes you can dispute the technical meaning of a word, but if they're being effectively used for communication, do you need to dispute them? Same but different. If somebody is calling out a distinction where there's no real difference, then ask, why are they calling out that? Life of a word. Words are born, they live, they evolve, they die. So remember that when you're communicating with people. Your understanding of the definition of a word may not be the same as theirs. It may have evolved. Strange creatures. Knowing about something is probably more important than knowing the name of something. And finally, remember that the name is not the thing. Don't confuse the two. So on to the second part. I'm looking down at the clock and I see I don't have a whole lot of time left. About 20 minutes, so I'm going to go a little bit fast. But this is the practical part. We're going to take all the stuff we learned about semantics and apply it to this phrase. Testers do, or perhaps don't, help prevent or detect problems. It's a phrase that I've heard many, many times, variations of this phrase throughout my entire 25 years in software testing. And people will argue it's true or it's not true, or they'll use one variation and claim that it's a fact, and other variations and say that it's not true. So I'm interested in digging into this, but I'm going to go from the bottom up. I'm going to start in reverse, and I'm going to start with the word problem. So what is a problem? A dictionary definition: a matter or situation regarded as an unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. Another wonderful definition of problem comes from the late, great Jerry Weinberg. He says it's a difference between things as desired, an emotion, and things as perceived. I love that because it shows that you can't really have problems if there's no difference. If things are lined up and your desires and perceptions are aligned, then it's not a problem at all. Sometimes as technologists, as testers, we don't just call them problems, we call them bugs. Very often we're searching for bugs in the software. A definition of bug is an error in a computer system or a program. Brett Petticord says that a bug is anything that bugs someone. Very, very simple, pithy, kind of acute definition that really gets the point across. If it bothers you, then it's probably a bug. But as testers, we don't just call them bugs. We have a lot of different names for these things. We call them defects or issues or failures or glitches or errors, exceptions, mistakes, incidents, goofs, blunders, oversights, anomalies, all sorts of different words that we use to describe problems. Now, are all of these different words important? Well, we just talked about how perceptions are sometimes affected by the words we use. So sometimes the word that you use can actually affect someone's perception. Imagine as a tester, you're testing and you encounter a problem in the software. And you go to the developer that coded that particular module and you say, hey, I found a blunder in the code. Certainly you goofed up. I found a goof of yours. How might that developer react? Now, it's just another word for problem, but from an emotional standpoint, they might feel offended. Now, on the other hand, what if you came to them and said, I found a bug, or I found a glitch, I found a flaw? Sometimes words can affect our perceptions, and therefore our perceptions affect our emotions. And that's important. Sometimes there's also legal ramifications. Perhaps your company has a contract with the client, and the contract includes legal language that says the software must be delivered with no more than 3 errors. Okay, well, what if you deliver the software and there's 5 problems? And this client comes back and says, hey, we have 5 problems. It's in breach of contract. And you say, well, 3 of them were errors, but 2 of them were just failures or just glitches. So you can, it's very important to have definitions that, like the glossary that I went to at the one company, define the words that you use because sometimes there's legal ramifications. Another thing I want to talk about with regards to problems is relativism. This is a big concept. I'm going to go through it quickly. Roughly, it's the doctrine that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, historical context. They're not absolute. Michael Bolton created the relative rule based off of relativism idea and the definition of quality from Jerry Weinberg, who says that quality is value to some person. Michael Bolton created the relative rule that says for any abstract x, x is only x to some person at some time. I've rephrased this relative rule to say that the relative rule describes the relationship between someone, that's who, and something, that's what, and some time, that's when. Now, if this seems a little confusing, I'll give you an example. This is a teddy bear. Of course, it's a teddy bear, but it's not just any teddy bear. It's a teddy bear to you and I. But this is Baby Joe, and this is Baby Joe's teddy bear, and it's not just Baby Joe's teddy bear, it's Mr. Snuggles. And Joe loves Mr. Snuggles. Joe loves Mr. Snuggles. Well, this is Joe's baby friend, Jane. Now, Jane knows about the bear, but it's not Mr. Snuggles. It's not her bear. She doesn't care about this bear. So Jane is rather indifferent to it. It doesn't make Jane feel as safe and secure as it does Joe. But Jane has something different. This is an example of changing the who. If you change the who, the relationship to the bear changes. What if you change the what? Jane has something. Jane has a blanket. And of course, Jane loves her little blanket. It's not just any blanket. It's Mr. Softy, the blanket. Well, Joe knows about the blanket, but he's rather indifferent to it. It's not his blanket. So this is changing the what. Sometimes if you change the what, it changes the relationship to something. Finally, this is Jane. She's all grown up now. She's an adult. She knows about the bear and the blanket, but now she's still indifferent to the bear. It's not her bear. And since she's an adult, she doesn't have the same feelings about the blanket that she did as a baby. So sometimes you change the when, and that can change the relationship to something. Now let's make this more about something that we're dealing with. Instead of a blanket, let's make it an error, a bug, a flaw. You're testing along, you try and click submit order, and instead of submitting the order, up comes an error, problem encountered. Well, guess what? Baby Joe doesn't really care about it because Baby Joe's not using the software. Baby Jane, she's not in front of a computer buying things online, but adult Jane, it makes her very angry. So again, this is a great description of relativism and the relative rule applied to things like bugs. If you change the who, if you change the what, if you change the when, it changes the relationship to that particular thing. So what? So why is this important? What we call problems might matter. If you call them glitches or blunders or flaws, it might make people feel differently. It also might be legal ramifications. So the words that you use for problems might actually matter legally. Also, remember that problems are relative. They're subjective to someone at some place at some time, and therefore they're not absolute. They're not objective. So back to our phrase, testers do or don't help prevent or detect problems. Prevent, what does it mean? Keeping something from happening or arising. Very simply, detect is discovering or identifying the presence or existence of something. So something I do before every presentation is I look up headlines that have the word prevent or detect in them. Excuse me. So detect, here's a few headlines that I just found recently. China launches the coronavirus app to detect whether users have come in close contact with the sick. Another headline I found, new video technology will help Minnesota police detect suspects. Finally, can AI detect fake news? So just by reading the headline alone, how do I feel about this detection? It's all right. You know, China has this new app that will detect whether users have come in close contact. Boy, I really would like it if I was able to find out before I came in close contact, not just detect whether I have. This video tech that helps Minnesota police detect suspects, the article actually says that Chief Higgins believes that this technology will help solve cases going forward, not prevent them. So too bad, you're gonna be the victim of crime, but don't worry, we'll solve it. We'll detect. So this is how the word alone makes me feel. I talked about how words can affect your perception and feeling. So I also looked for headlines that have the word prevent in it. Installation of technology to prevent rail crashes nears completion. Another one, San Antonio firefighters prevent fire from spreading to the University Hospital. And what steps can you take to prevent identity theft? How do I feel just by reading the headline of these? A little happier when compared to how I feel about the detect headlines. The very first one, it's a system that automatically stops or slows trains and that helps them prevent collisions and derailments. That's wonderful. So not only they have to detect when this is about to happen, but the technology can help prevent this bad thing. Of course, this fire one, a fire at a construction site outside of a hospital caused quite a scare on Monday, but the firefighters managed to keep it from spreading. They prevented it from spreading. Now, of course, in order to prevent something, you have to detect it first, but preventing makes me feel a lot better. Another thing I want to talk about with regards to preventing and detecting is causality. Now, causality, this is another very philosophical, interesting concept. It's humongous, and I'm going to go over it in about 5 minutes, but it's basically the relationship between cause and effect. I'll give you an example and a story that will help drive this home and why I think causality is relevant to preventing and detecting problems. Here's our bug. We talked about this earlier. I try and submit something online for purchase, and instead of buying that thing, I get an error. And we already know how it makes adult Jane feel. She was trying to buy something online, and it makes her angry. But if you're familiar with causality, it's always a many-to-many relationship. There's always many reasons and causes that have many effects. Even if they're not explicitly stated, there's always many factors and variables that cause many other factors and variables. So when this bug happens, not only does it make Jane very angry, it has another effect. The company loses money because instead of the customer buying that product, they receive an error, therefore the company doesn't get that money. So there's a couple, this is a very oversimplified example, but there's two effects from this particular cause. Well, what caused the problem in the first place? Let's go backwards down the causality chain. Well, it was an error in the code. There was just an extra semicolon in the code, a fat finger. Somebody accidentally clicked the semicolon twice, and therefore it compiled just fine, but ended up throwing an error, which made Jane very angry, and the company lost money. Well, why was there an extra semicolon? Let's go further back. There's baby Joe all grown up. Now he's a developer, and normally he's the top developer at this company, but this day he was very, very tired, and since he was so tired, he accidentally typed a second semicolon, which compiled just fine, caused an error that made Jane angry, and the company lost money. Well, why was Joe tired? Well, he was up all night because next door there was a dog barking, and it kept him up, and therefore Joe was very tired, and he hit an extra semicolon, which compiled just fine, and you know the rest. But why was this dog up all night? Well, similarly, how some single cause or a cause can have multiple effects. Sometimes there's multiple causes for an effect. The dog was up all night because, number one, it was very cold out that day. It's late fall and it's very cold. And also, the dog doesn't have a doghouse to keep it warm. It was outside. It was very cold. The dog was uncomfortable, so it barked all night, and that kept poor Joe, the excellent developer, up. And then Joe came to work, and he was so tired he accidentally hit semicolon twice, and that compiled just fine, but it threw an error when Jane tried to buy something that made her angry, and the company lost money. So let's put our point of view at different places in this causality chain. If I put my point of view here, it might be fair to say, as a tester, I was testing the application and I detected this problem. That's fair. Now, if I detect this problem, nothing happens just because I detected it. But let's say that the developers go and they check out the code, they make the change, they check it in, it compiles, I retest it. Now it works fine, and you're able to purchase things. They release it to production. Now Jane is able to purchase things. She's no longer angry, and the company makes money. It might be reasonable to say that I helped prevent Jane being angry, and I helped prevent the company losing money. Let's move our point of view. What if right here, what if I'm sitting in on a code review and I noticed that semicolon? I say, hey, wait a second, there's a second semicolon in this line. So a developer checks out the code, they delete that extra semicolon, they check it back in, and therefore, following the same causality chain, it might be fair to say I detected the problem at this stage, thus preventing a potential error dialog from popping up, preventing Jane from being angry, preventing the company from losing money. And you can put your point of view anywhere. What if I stopped the dog from barking? I went over and I put a muzzle on this thing. Maybe it's reasonable to say I detected the dog barking and I did something about it. Therefore, I prevented Joe from being tired and typing the semicolon and making the bug and the error message and making Jane angry and having the company lose money. So there are a lot of different perspectives and things that you can learn from using causality chain to talk about preventing and detecting. Now, what's that arrow at the top? Because I love time paradoxes and things. What was Jane buying online? Of course, she was buying a doghouse for her dog. So in some kind of weird time paradox, Jane was able to create her own bug. So I hope you enjoyed that. All right, moving on. So what? Potential effects of word choice. Just by saying prevent or detect can mean different things, and it can affect people emotionally. Second, consider causality and their perspective. Depending on where you put your point of view, it can mean different things. Moving on, help. Help is a catentative verb. It's a verb that can be followed directly by another verb and give it extended meaning. Help makes it easier for someone or to do something. It improves the situation. You can be of benefit or assistance to. So how is this word important to this phrase? Let's look back at our causality chain, and our point of view is right here. Can you as a tester detect a problem all by yourself? I would say yes, you can. I would say yes, you're able to detect a problem all by yourself. Now, of course, technically, you needed someone to make the program, unless you made it yourself. But technically, you needed someone to make the computer to make the program on, unless you made the computer yourself. And technically, you needed someone to find the sand to make the silicon. So technically, yes, you needed a lot of help just to be able to detect this error message all by yourself. However, for the purposes of this demonstration and this example, I'm going to say you can detect something all by yourself. So you don't really need any help to detect it. What about if you move your point of view right here? Maybe you can detect the problem all by yourself. You can say, hey, I'm in a code review and I see this problem. You didn't help detect it. You detected it all by yourself. But what about preventing the further problems? Maybe you don't have the skills. You don't know the language. You don't have the permission to go in and check out code. So you have to ask Joe, the developer, can you go in, check out the code, remove that semicolon, and then check it back in, recompile, and push it out to production? And he says, sure, I can do all that. Then maybe it's fair to say you detected the problem, but you helped prevent other problems, such as Jane being angry, such as the company losing money. So the word help is very important, whether you can do something on your own or with the help of others. Maybe I can't just muzzle that dog by myself. Maybe I have to get the owner's permission, so I need help preventing that problem. So what? The inclusion or exclusion of the word help might change the meaning of the phrase. Consider the specific problem that's happening and if a detection or prevention of the problem can be done alone or if you need someone else's assistance. Moving on, do or don't. These are more verbs, helping verbs in fact. These verbs help the main verb of a sentence by extending its meaning. They convey complicated shades of meaning. There's different types of these. The first is auxiliary. Auxiliary verbs are used in forming the tenses or moods or voices of other verbs. One's particular part, there's a couple auxiliary verbs here. Do and don't talk about the tense. Did and didn't is past tense. One type of auxiliary verb is modal verbs. This is an auxiliary verb that expresses necessity or possibility. So here's an example of a few auxiliary verbs. Can or could, they talk about the ability or possibility to do something. May or might is permission or possibility again. Will or would is about requesting something or consequences. Must is necessity or requirement. And finally, shall and should, which is about obligation or correctness or suggestion. Now, that's an interesting one I want to talk a little bit further about. But replacing do or don't in this sentence with one of these other auxiliary modal verbs can have a drastic effect on the meaning of the sentence. Let's look at this. Testers do help prevent or detect problems. Oh, okay, you're telling me that they do. That's fine. Maybe that's a fact. At your company, they do this. Or testers didn't help prevent or detect problems. Maybe you're looking backwards in the past and say, well, the testers didn't have anything to do with it. They didn't. Or what about testers can help prevent problems? Or testers may. They have permission to at our particular company. They may detect problems. What about testers will? They will. It's a directive from the top. They say testers will help prevent or detect problems. It's part of their job description. Or testers must, another directive. Now, the last one's very interesting. Testers should help prevent or detect problems. Should is about a suggestion. It talks about how things might be or how they could be. This is, I want to talk about the difference between descriptive statements, which are making an assertion based on empirical evidence. These are also called facts. But should is a normative statement. If you say someone should do something, this expresses a value judgment, something that's subjective for your point of view. It's expressing an opinion. For example, descriptive is an 11-letter word. That's a fact. Normative, on the other hand, is a better word. That's subjective. That's my opinion. Now, why is this important with the word should? Because you have to recognize if they're using the word should, that is a normative word, which is a normative, makes it a normative statement. It's an opinion. So what does all this mean? Identifying the helping verb that's used or perhaps omitted or implied in the sentence. And that can help you better understand what might actually be meant when the person's saying this. Second, consider if it's a statement of fact or opinion. If they're saying they did or do or will or must, maybe that's true at their particular company based on how they work. If they're saying it should or shouldn't, testers shouldn't detect defects or shouldn't help prevent problems, then maybe that's just their opinion. Finally, testers. To start this off, I'll give you some definitions of testing so we can better understand what is a tester exactly. I have a few definitions. I've read hundreds of definitions at blogs and dictionaries and articles of what testing is. One of my favorites comes from RST, Rapid Software Testing's Bach and Bolton, and they say it's the process of evaluating a product by learning about it through exploration and experimentation, which includes to some degree questioning, studying, modeling, observing, inference, etc. I love this definition. It gives a lot of meat about what testing is and how it's done. One thing I think is missing from this definition is why. Sometimes definitions include reasons, and I think that makes a more robust definition. Well, another definition of testing comes from Kem Kainer, and he says it's an investigation conducted, why? To provide stakeholders with information about the quality of the product or service under test. So this one has a little less about what it is, but more about why people do it. So sometimes I mash up these two definitions together to give a more robust definition of testing. It includes what, why, and how. However, after reading hundreds of definitions, I've also come up with my own definition of testing, and here it is. Testing is, to me, Damien's definition, utilizing various tools and approaches. I think that testers do that. There's many different tools that we testers use and many different approaches and methods and techniques that we use. In some combination and to some degree, I don't use all the tools I know at once. I use some of them, and I don't use all the approaches. And sometimes I use them in various combinations, these tools and these approaches, and I use them to some degree. I'm using a little bit of this technique and a lot of that approach. Why? To help evaluate quality. Essentially, that's what testing is. You're evaluating quality. Quality is valued to someone at some time, the Jerry Weinberg definition. How? Via exploration and experimentation. That's borrowing from the RST definition. Exploring, experimenting, you're searching the unknown. This is what scientists do. Or you're comparing against a hypothesis. This is what scientists do. That's exploration, experimentation. Why? Well, often, not always, this is the why, is to obtain pertinent and useful information. Well, sometimes I test because it's fun. Sometimes I test for money. Sometimes I test for practice to get better. But very often it's to obtain pertinent and useful information. Both of those words are important, pertinent and useful. And do what with it? To provide it to relevant stakeholders. I'm not giving the information from my testing performance to my kids. I'm giving it to people that are interested in that information, relevant stakeholders. I'm giving them the pertinent, useful information. Why? To enable more informed, confident decisions. It's clear that you can make a more informed, confident decisions if you have information. It's an educated decision rather than one that's based on guesses. And so what does that matter? It may also indirectly lead to increased quality. I may provide wonderful testing information that's useful and pertinent to relevant stakeholders, and they decide not to act on it. In that case, it will not lead to increased quality. But if they do act on it, it may indirectly lead to increased quality. That is my definition of testing. It's large, but I think it contains all the important pieces of what testing actually is. So, what is a tester? A tester is simply one who performs testing. Now, this is important because right now, I'm Damien Synadinos, I'm a speaker. I already said that I'm also a tester, but am I testing right now? Am I doing any of the things in here? Am I utilizing various tools and approaches to evaluate quality by exploring? I'm not doing those things. So although I am a tester, it's probably not reasonable or logical to call me a tester at this very moment. I also play poker and I play basketball and I'm a dad. And although I am those things, I'm not those things at this particular moment. So if you see somebody doing something at their desk, you can say, are they being a tester at this moment? If they're not doing one of the things in the definition of testing, mine or the one that you've defined at your company, then maybe at that moment they're not doing the testing activity. And that also brings into light, what is the definition of testing at your company? Although I like the rapid software testing definition and the Kem Kainer and my own, your company may have a different definition of testing. Maybe testing at your company is very similar to this. It's utilizing various tools and approaches, blah, blah, blah. And it also says, and checking out code, and editing code, writing code, and checking in code, and pushing to production. Maybe that is also part of the testing definition. If that's the case at your company, if someone is checking out code and hitting delete to remove an extra semicolon and checking that code back into production, and that's part of the definition of testing, at that moment, by that definition, they are a tester. And at that moment, as we already saw through the causality chain, they are helping to prevent a problem. So we do a lot of different things. But at the moment, are you doing the thing that's in the definition of testing? Why does this matter? The definition of testing at your context, at your company, might change the meaning of the entire phrase. Next, consider the actions performed to better understand the accuracy of the phrase. What things are you doing, and how does that affect the meaning of the phrase? So here's a few variations of it. Testers detect defects. Testers don't prevent problems. Testers must help detect bugs. Testers should help prevent bugs, in opinion. Testers can prevent failures, a possibility. Testers can't help prevent issues. Well, maybe not at your company. Are any of these true? Are any of these not true? It depends. So in summary, testers, understand the definition of testing first. What is the definition of testing at your company? And that'll help you better understand the role and responsibilities of a tester and the meaning of the phrase. Next, do and don't. Identifying the helping verb that's being used and consider if it's a statement of facts or opinion. Next, help. It's that catentative verb. Consider how the inclusion or exclusion of this word affects the meaning of the phrase. It's something that the person can do all alone, or is it something that they require assistance? Prevent and detect. Remember that the word choice can affect how you feel, can affect perception, and remember the point of view matters too, whether you're preventing or detecting. You detect something at one point in the causality chain, which may be reasonable to say that you prevented other things. And finally, problems. Problems by any other name, like arose, are subjective. It may change your perception, your feelings, and it also may have other legal ramifications. Keith Klain, a friend of mine, I follow him on Twitter. He had this to say, and I thought it was incredibly relevant to this entire discussion. What if we spent more time talking to each other about what words actually mean instead of being wound up about what we think people meant by them? That is a wonderful restatement of what semantic discussions are for me. So thank you. Please remember that words matter. Semantics is significant. It's not a dirty word. It's something that we do daily. Embrace it. Help communicate with other people through understanding. And thank you very much. My name is Damian Sinodinos.
Great. Thank you so much, Damien. I really appreciate the presentation you gave. That was great.
Thank you.
In the minutes that we have left, if anybody does have any questions and you want to put that in the Q&A, please feel free to do so. So just once again, everybody, you know, DCCAP is the parent company of QA Touch. So that's just a little bit more about our products. And thank you so much for joining us for the QA Touch virtual series, the masterclass number 4. We do have these monthly, so keep posted and watch on our events site. And that's just at dccap.com/events, the dckap.com/events. And then in regards to your presentation, Damien, again, I just want to thank you. Obviously, you know, the questioning and communication part of software testing may not always come up as part of the discussion, but certainly some very, very important things to think about there. You know, the significance and impact of communication, whether in conversation or software testing, is certainly important. So really helpful insights that you provided. So thank you again with your presentation and for sharing and spending some time with us, Damien. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks to the attendees as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.